name is Ryan Naylor. I am an Associate Professor at the Sydney School of Health Sciences at the University of Sydney. I've been working as a researcher in student equity for about 10 years now. I particularly focus in my research on evaluating the student experience and barriers to success for students in higher education. And in the past, I've worked on projects like the Critical Interventions Framework, and I also published an evaluation guide for equity practitioners, which is published by the National Centre for Student Equity in Higher Education. My advice for equity practitioners who are planning on presenting findings to internal or external audiences is probably comes in three parts. Now, it's not for this video, but I really need to emphasise that for good evaluation and disseminating findings well relies on having a good plan from the very beginning for evaluating your project. So be very clear about the concrete goals of your initiatives, having solid program logic, and making sure that you have robust, varied, and appropriate data from the very beginning. Because if you don't have that planning in place, you're not going to have quality findings to be able to disseminate it. Internally, you need to be aware of your audience and write for that. Often for internal documents, you really have two audiences, and it's important that people understand that as well. So for many people, particularly in university leaderships, they will only read the executive summary. So the executive summary absolutely needs to be relevant to that audience and to stand on its own. Things to think about as you're writing an executive summary is to include the aims of the project, the background or the context that you're operating in, a brief description of the initiative, and including some justification for why you think it would be effective. And following that up then with things like the evaluation criteria and data, including limitations, which you'll need to kind of justify or contextualize. Then, of course, the findings and the implications and recommendations. And you need to do all of that as succinctly as possible. Equity practitioners often are hesitant about including things like limitations and recommendations, but these are really valuable, even though they're often neglected. So you don't need to include everything, but you need to understand that people reading your executive summary, university leadership, will be using that to make key decisions. So it's very important for you to be able to give them the information they need to understand the problem that you're trying to solve, or the problem that they are helping you to try to solve, and the information that they need to make those important decisions. So if your reader is asking, "So what?" at the end of your executive summary, then you've done it wrong and you need to rework it so that that message is very clear. And of course, the other audience for your internal reporting is other practitioners, generally who'll be working alongside you or in similar projects, and they're the ones who will probably actually end up reading the rest of the paper. So you can be more detailed. For an external audience, again, relevance is absolutely essential. Also, the theoretical justification in many cases will be more important. So that's where the focus will shift slightly, so that you are concentrating more on the theory justification for why you expect the program to work the way it did or didn't. And particularly when you're working from practitioner to practitioner or disseminating findings from practitioner to practitioner, they are looking to learn from your experience. So under those sorts of circumstances, it's absolutely acceptable and indeed helpful to be able to give your audience hints from your learned experience about what worked well and what didn't. And remember, of course, that you're speaking to this wider audience on behalf of the communities that you've worked with. So you are helping those communities as well and the experiences they've had through participating in your program. Also, when you're presenting externally, my next piece of advice would be to make sure that you only present when you have something to say. Sometimes people come to present at conferences or something similar, perhaps a little too early. And so try to make sure that you've got your good evaluation plan and something well thought out, well structured, and relevant to the audience that you're about to present to, so that they can get the most out of your talk rather than wasting their time. Two last groups that you might want to think about when presenting findings. The first is around collaborations with academics. So in my experience, academics are very keen to collaborate with professional staff in the equity space. Maybe not all academics, obviously, but many will, even if they are unable to work with you on your project itself, will be happy to provide advice where they can and that sort of thing. So don't be afraid to reach out to academics that you work with or in the same institution. And finally, the media. I think presenting findings in the media is really important to help overcome the deficit discourses that are really prevalent in this sort of space. But again, you're presenting to a different audience. So again, you need to rework what you're doing so it's relevant to that audience. And that's very different to both the internal university environment and when you're presenting to other practitioners at conferences and so on. If you do work with the media, you'll probably be asked to provide information or contact details for participants so that you can provide a kind of human colour to the media story. And generally speaking, it's a good idea to get permission from your home university and the community that you've been working with before you do it. But the university will have media advisors who'll be able to help you through this. So I think talking to the media is something that's often neglected, but is a really important aspect for equity practitioners to consider when they have a good news story from their work to disseminate.